Part 1. Fired from the story Fired, Flawed and Forgiven. He stood outside the diner with the neon sign flickering behind streaks of grease on the window. The smell of grilled onions drifted through the night air, tugging at something deep in his memory. Chris adjusted the collar of his second-hand shirt and rubbed his hands together, more out of nerves than cold. He'd worn that same shirt to every interview for the last 3 weeks. He was clean, he was qualified, and nobody cared. The rejection wasn't new. He'd learned how to take it, nod, smile, say, "Thank you for your time," and walk away before the sting set in. But today was different. Today, he had exactly $7 in his wallet and just enough gas to make it home. There wouldn't be another application after this. This diner was the last stop. He passed a bakery where the smell of warm cinnamon rolls leaked into the street. A woman exited with a to-go bag and glanced his way. Chris gave a nod. She didn't return it. Her eyes flicked past him like he was just another shadow on the sidewalk. That didn't surprise him either. He had become invisible in places like this, where clean shirts and worn shoes told 2 different stories. A nod from a man like him meant uncertainty, maybe trouble. And people didn't want that with their morning pastry. He lowered his eyes and kept walking. One day, maybe, someone would look back. Just not today. A passing waitress gave him a side glance through the glass. Her expression flickered with something, recognition, maybe judgment, maybe just the usual wariness reserved for men like him, who stood too long without purpose. She looked away, just as quickly, returning her focus to the tray in her hands, her movements sharp and practiced. He didn't blame her. People learned early in the service world to keep their guard up. A stranger at the window was just one more unknown. And he knew he looked like a risk. He'd been a chef once, not famous, but respected. Worked kitchens that plated food like art. People used to ask for his sauces by name. Once he cooked for a city mayor. Got offered a spot on a local food show. That was before the fight, before the trial, before the silence. But that was 2 years, 1 mistake, and a prison sentence ago. He took a breath and walked inside. It wasn't just a breath, it was a decision. To be seen, to risk hearing another no, to put himself in front of someone who might already know his story and choose to turn away. It was easier to keep walking, safer not to hope. But something about this place, the flickering sign, the smell, the faint memory of a dish he once made, whispered, "Try one more time." So he did. The bell over the door rang like it always did in places like this, thin, sharp, a little too loud. The smell hit harder inside, grease, brewed coffee, old vinyl, and something sweet baking in back. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch when he said, "I'm here about the dishwasher job." She looked up slowly, eyes sharp as a paring knife, mid-60s, steel grey hair pinned back tight, pen behind her ear, and hands that had seen every kind of spill. She had the look of someone who didn't waste time on small talk or second guesses. But there was something else under the gruffness, something steady. She might bark orders and call things as she saw them, but there was a quiet steadiness to her, the kind that came from cleaning up messes and showing up anyway. She was tough, but not unkind. "You been inside?" she asked, her voice flat, but not cruel. Chris knew what she meant, not inside the diner, inside the system, the kind of inside that came with mugshots, courtrooms, and long silences. He nodded. No point in lying. She didn't move, just looked down at his hands. Big hands, calloused, a burn scar near the wrist from a 500-degree oven door. "You cooked for my mother, in hospice. She couldn't eat much, but she always finished what you made." She said it slowly, not like a fact, but like a puzzle piece falling into place. It had been bothering her since he walked in, the way he held himself, the quiet way he scanned the room, even the slight limp in his left step. But it was his hands that did it. The shape of them. The way one rested lightly on the counter, fingers curled slightly inward, just like he used to do when plating something delicate. And then she knew. The cook from the hospice kitchen, the one who made lemon broth and served it, like it mattered. That stopped him. He didn't know what to say. "I remember the lemon broth," she added, almost like a memory she wasn't planning to say out loud. He hesitated. She liked the lemon? She said it reminded her of home. The woman stared a second longer, then jerked her head toward the back. "Apron's on the hook. Don't break the plates. First break, you're out." He blinked. "I'm hired?" It caught him off guard, like someone had offered him a glass of water after days in the desert. He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. His voice cracked a little, too uncertain to believe the moment. Part of him waited for her to take it back, to add some condition he couldn't meet. "You're washing dishes, not running the country. Start with the pans." She turned away as she said it, but not before he caught it, a flicker in her eyes, not a smile, but not indifference either. A kind of quiet assurance that said, "I'll give you a shot if you don't waste it." Gruff, yes, but fair. And maybe, just maybe, rooting for him in her own no-nonsense way. The kitchen smelled like bacon fat, bleach, and something burnt, stuck to a stovetop. Chris didn't mind. He liked kitchens, even the messy ones. There was rhythm in them, purpose, the clang of pans, the sizzle of grease, the hum of the walk-in cooler. It all brought something familiar back to him, like muscle memory waking up after a long sleep. He hadn't realized how much he missed it. Not the stress, not the shouting, but the way a kitchen breathed when it worked right. The flow, the urgency, the quiet sense that everything mattered, even if just for a moment. He didn't have a title here, no chef's coat. But as he stepped into that heat and noise, it felt like a piece of himself clicked back into place. The cook, a guy with tired eyes and a cigarette tucked behind one ear, gave him a quick nod. Didn't ask questions, didn't offer a name. Someone else handed him gloves and pointed to the sink. Chris didn't say much that first shift, just scrubbed and rinsed. The dishes stacked fast and came back faster. Chicken fried steak, chili bowls, waffle plates, and an endless stream of mugs with stubborn lipstick stains. By hour 2, his hands were wrinkled and raw, his back aching from the bend. The steam rose and clung to his skin. The rhythm started to come back. Not the glamour of fine dining, just the muscle memory of motion and precision. He kept his head down, tried not to flinch when the back door slammed. But the sound still hit something inside him, a reflex that hadn't softened with time. Tried not to remember the last time someone shoved him through a kitchen door in handcuffs. The shouting, the confusion, the feel of tile against his knees. It had happened fast, and yet he'd replayed it 100 times since. That kitchen had been the place where everything unraveled. This one, he hoped, quietly, could be where something began again. Someone dropped a plate. It shattered near his feet. No one said a word. He swept it up. At one point, a busboy asked him, "You been here before?" Chris paused. "Not here, but yeah." It was all he could offer. He didn't owe this kid the story, and the kid didn't ask. But the truth hung in the air anyway. That simple exchange, a shared understanding between two people who'd seen more than they said, felt like a thread, thin but real. Chris didn't say more. Didn't need to. In a place like this, sometimes a quiet nod said enough. The kid nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. At break, he sat on an overturned milk crate outside. A waitress came out for a smoke. They didn't talk. She offered him a cigarette. He shook his head. She didn't press. And that, in its own way, meant something. No questions, no judgment, just a quiet kind of recognition. The offer itself was a signal. He wasn't being shut out. She may not have known his story, but she'd offered him a bridge. In his old life, breaks were loud, full of bravado and banter. This was different. There was space in the silence, a strange kind of dignity in being left alone, but not ignored. For a man trying to find his footing, that unspoken acceptance was a start. Maybe the people here weren't eager, but they weren't hostile. That was enough. The cook opened the door, shouted, "You alive out there?" Chris stood and went back in without answering. Inside, someone had left him a soda. No note, just a small kindness. He didn't touch it for an hour. Then he did. It was warm, but good. By closing, his arms ached. The bottoms of his shoes stuck slightly to the tile. His fingers burned from detergent and steel wool, but he hadn't stopped. Not once. He didn't dare. Not because someone told him not to, but because stopping would have meant giving the job a reason to cut him loose. In his mind, the line between opportunity and failure was razor thin. One moment of rest, one wrong impression, and it could all disappear. He'd been given exactly one chance. And he knew better than to act like he deserved it. The waitress gave him a tired thumbs up as she clocked out. He nodded. Just barely. A connection made in exhaustion. He reached for his jacket, and that's when he saw it. A name tag. Blank. No one had claimed it. He held it a moment, just stared. The plastic surface caught the light, clean and untouched. It was nothing, just a blank tag. But to him it felt heavier than it looked. Like a question waiting to be answered. He hadn't worn a name on his chest in a long time. Not one he was proud of. Not one he felt he deserved. He traced the edge with his thumb, imagining what it would feel like to write Chris on it and know it belonged. Then he slipped it in his pocket. Maybe he'd earned the right to write his name on it. Maybe not, but tonight, at least, he had a pocket to carry it in. And that was more than yesterday. He walked home slow that night. The car was out of gas, and he didn't want to waste the last few dollars in his wallet. It wasn't far, and the night air felt like a reset. His legs were tired, but walking gave him space to breathe. Something about moving forward, even on foot, felt right. Past shuttered storefronts and flickering streetlights, past the taco truck with two guys laughing too loud, past a mother dragging a stroller up uneven pavement, past the world that kept spinning, even when his had stopped. A group of kids whizzed past him on bikes. One shouted something. Chris didn't catch it. Didn't matter. He wasn't in the mood to explain himself to strangers. A few blocks from home, he stopped in front of a window display. Old furniture, a stack of mismatched teacups. His reflection looked tired, but solid. He crossed the street and paused in front of an old corner market. The lights were off, but taped in the window was a flyer. Men's shelter, volunteer needed. Saturdays. He stared at it longer than he meant to. It pulled at something he hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet stirring that maybe he still had something to give. He didn't know if they'd take someone like him, but just seeing it, a request for help, felt strangely like hope. Like the world wasn't completely closed off to men who'd made mistakes. He stood there for a while, imagining what it might feel like to be needed again, not for a paycheck, but for something human. Then he looked away, unsure why his chest felt tight. His phone buzzed once. Missed call, unknown. He didn't check it, just kept walking. The streetlight flickered overhead. His shadow stretched long and thin. Not fired tonight, not wanted either. It was a strange middle ground. No applause, no handshake, just a quiet continuation. He hadn't been asked to stay, but he hadn't been told to go. For someone who'd lived in the extremes, praise or punishment, inclusion or rejection, that kind of neutrality was unfamiliar. But in its own quiet way, it felt like progress, like maybe being invisible wasn't the same as being dismissed. But there was water on his skin and soap in his clothes and something like peace under all that fatigue, the kind of peace that didn't come from applause or approval, but from work, honest, hard, physical work. It clung to him like the steam of the kitchen, quiet but grounding. He hadn't earned forgiveness, not yet, but he'd earned a day clean of failure. And somehow that was enough to let his shoulders drop just a little. Enough to let his heart beat softer in his chest, something small maybe, but real. He passed the window of a darkened barber shop. Taped to the mirror inside was a quote, "Everybody deserves a second chance. Some of us just need a third." Chris stopped, smiled, kept walking. End of part 1. Sometimes second chances don't look like open doors. Sometimes they look like dish pits and silent grace. Stay with us for part 2, where an empty kitchen puts everything on the line, and Chris must decide whether to stay quiet or rise up and take the heat. Part 2. Flawed. The back door slammed, hard. The sound cut through the steam and sizzle of the lunch rush like a blade. Everyone froze for half a second. Then the orders kept coming. Chris looked up from the dish pit, suds still clinging to his forearms. The air smelled like scorched eggs and desperation. He wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, just in time to see the cook's apron hit the floor in a heap, like a flag of surrender. The man had walked out mid-shift, just bailed. No note, no warning, no explanation. The door swung back hard, clanging against the frame before settling into a slow, uneven sway. Chris stared at the apron for a moment, stunned by the finality of it. That apron wasn't just fabric, it was responsibility, heat, authority, pressure. And now it was abandoned. He looked around. The other workers stood frozen, eyes wide, waiting for someone, anyone, to move first. The ticket printer kept spitting out orders with mechanical indifference. In kitchens, time doesn't pause just because someone quits. The waitress closest to the pass window stepped forward, voice sharp and panicked. "Table 5's eggs are burning!" Chris stepped forward. Just a step, then stopped himself. He wasn't supposed to be here, not on the line. He was the dishwasher. Hired on a second chance, on probation, on silence, not just because of the job title, but because of everything that had come before it. Because a man with a record doesn't get to improvise, he doesn't get to make waves or draw attention. He's supposed to be invisible, do his job, keep his head down, be grateful he has one at all. The deal was clear, no extra noise, no extra chances. And stepping onto that line meant stepping outside of all of that. If he messed this up, even a little, it wouldn't just be a mistake. It would be a reason to let him go. It would confirm what people already assumed about him, that he couldn't be trusted, that he didn't belong. But the kitchen was falling apart, and someone had to do something. Chris took a breath. Deep, steady. He looked at the apron again, then at the burning eggs. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: the food had to be made. And he was the only one who could do it. He tossed his gloves, wiped his hands, and moved to the stove. He didn't move out of ego. He moved because someone needed to take responsibility. Because the people waiting on the other side of that wall were hungry. Because the team around him was panicking. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the shame and the labels and the time served, he still believed he had something to offer. The eggs were indeed burning. He flipped the pan, scraped off the edges, cracked 2 more with one hand, and dropped a fresh pat of butter in the skillet. The waitress stared at him. "You know how to cook?" she asked, eyebrows raised, the words half skepticism, half surprise. Her tone wasn't mocking, but it held weight, the kind of disbelief that comes from too many letdowns and not enough help. Cooks didn't just appear out of dish pits, not ones who moved like that, not ones with steady hands and calm under pressure. She wasn't trying to insult him, just trying to understand what she was seeing. Chris didn't answer. He didn't need to, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because the answer was already there, sizzling in the skillet. The way he cracked the eggs without breaking rhythm. The way he reached for the salt, not to guess, but because he already knew where flavor belonged. His hands spoke a language the others didn't expect from a dishwasher. And in that moment, his quiet competence was louder than any words he could have offered. He moved like he belonged, because in some part of his soul, he still did. It was muscle memory, sure, but it was more than that. It was identity, trying to resurface after being buried under failure and fear. He moved with a kind of instinct that came from years behind grills and stovetops. He hadn't forgotten who he was. He'd just gone quiet for a while. What he needed now wasn't permission. It was trust, his own and others. His hands had changed, rougher now, more scarred, but they still knew how to season without measuring, how to plate with care. He didn't try to make it fancy, he just made it right. The orders kept rolling. Burgers, hash, a special with extra onions. The rhythm came back fast, faster than he expected. It lived in his muscles, not his memory. He didn't speak much, just cooked. The waitress called out orders. Chris nodded. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't perform. He just got it done. The line cook peeked through the swinging door from the front. "You good back here?" Chris flipped a pancake, then nodded once. It wasn't just that he was good. It was that he remembered how to be useful, and it felt like oxygen. One of the younger staff lingered nearby, watching him move. Chris didn't say much, but he passed a few quiet tips between orders, little things about grill temperature, how to butter the bun just right. "Thanks," the kid muttered at one point. Chris just nodded. There was no room for ego, but inside it felt like someone had handed him a thread and told him to start pulling. After the rush, the kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the fridge. Chris went back to the sink, picked up the sponge, kept going. He didn't want to assume anything, didn't want to act like he belonged just because the kitchen hadn't collapsed. He was grateful for the silence. Grateful not to be sent packing. The owner came in from the office. Her eyes scanned the room. Clean plates, empty tables, a faint smell of toast lingering in the air. She looked at him, hard, steady, like she was still trying to decide what she thought of what had just happened. "You stepped out of line," she said finally, her voice flat but not harsh. Chris nodded, not defensive, just honest. "I know." She didn't respond right away, just leaned against the doorframe and let the silence hang between them for a moment. The hum of the fridge filled the space. Her arms folded, her expression softened, just barely. "You saved our necks," she said at last, the words coming out slower than before, like she hadn't expected to say them. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. The way she said it, the shift in her tone, the admission, was more than gratitude. It was respect, surprise maybe, a grudging kind of acknowledgement that came from someone who'd seen enough to know when a moment could have gone very differently, and didn't. Chris didn't smile or deflect. He just went back to rinsing dishes, water running over his hands like it had before. But something in the air had changed, and this time she didn't tell him to stop. Chris didn't smile, just kept rinsing. His hands moved in circles, slow and steady. Inside, though, his heart pounded. He hadn't realized how badly he'd needed to hear that. "Come back early tomorrow." He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he nodded. That night, he didn't walk straight home. He took the long way. Not because he was avoiding anything, but because for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was running from something. He was walking towards something, toward possibility. His shoulders ached, but in a way that felt earned. His shoes were still damp, and the laces kept coming untied. But none of that mattered. Something had shifted. He passed a boy sitting on a curb, drawing with chalk. Chris recognized him. He'd seen the kid near the shelter a few times. He had a to-go container from the diner in his hand, extra pancakes. "You hungry?" Chris asked. The boy nodded without looking up. Chris sat beside him. They didn't talk. He handed over the container, then stood up. "Next time, tell your mum to come by. We'll make extra." He didn't wait for a reply. Didn't need one. The gesture had already said what words couldn't. It was quiet, but it meant something. It wasn't about charity or pity. It was about dignity, respect. One man to another. Chris had seen that boy before. Thin shoulders, wary eyes, the kind that had learned to expect very little and ask for even less. But maybe, just maybe, this small moment would linger. A warm meal handed without fanfare, a stranger sitting beside him without rushing off. Maybe it would plant a seed, not just of comfort but of possibility. That someone cared. That good things could still find their way to you, even if you didn't go looking. Because Chris remembered what it felt like to be on the other side of that kindness, and now, for the first time in a long time, he had something to offer back. As he turned the corner, he passed the community board on the side of the pharmacy. A flyer caught his eye. Cooking classes at the community center. Volunteers needed. He paused for a moment, imagined himself standing in front of a group of teenagers, showing them how to hold a knife properly. He thought about what he might say. "This is how you keep control of the blade. This is how you stay calm when everything's on fire." He wasn't ready. But the thought didn't scare him. That night, Chris lay on his mattress staring at the ceiling. He thought about the eggs, the heat, the way his hands had moved like they remembered more than he did. He turned his head and looked at the shelf above his bed. A name tag still sat there, blank. The cheap plastic one they'd given him when he was hired. He'd never written on it. Never felt like he deserved to. But tonight something felt different. He sat up, legs dangling over the side of the mattress. Reached for it. It was still wrapped in the clear plastic sleeve, edges curled from heat and time. He peeled it open, ran a thumb over the smooth surface. He thought about grabbing a marker. Thought about writing his name in big, bold letters, staking a claim to this version of himself he hadn't seen in years. But then he paused, let the tag rest in his open palm, maybe not tonight. Not because he didn't believe he belonged, but because now, he wanted the name to mean something. Not just ink. Not just hope. He wanted it to carry the weight of a man who kept showing up, day after day, not needing a spotlight. Just willing hands and a steady heart. He smiled. Small, tired, but real. Then, gently, he slipped the tag back into the sleeve and laid it on the shelf again. He thought about how no one questioned him while he cooked. They just let him do it. He thought about the days he used to own kitchens, the ones with open flames and shouting orders. He used to think that being in charge meant being louder than everyone else, but that had burned him, literally and figuratively. Then came the day he lost it all. Back then, it had been chaos, a shouting match that escalated too fast. Then fists flew. His, someone else's. It all blurred together, and before he knew it, the cops were called. He hadn't thrown the first punch, but that hadn't mattered. He'd been trying to protect someone, a younger cook, getting harassed by a regular, the kind of guy who thought tipping meant owning the staff. Chris had stepped in, tried to de-escalate, but words turned to yelling, and yelling turned to blows. It wasn't professional, but it was human. And it cost him everything. They fired him on the spot. Word spread fast. No one asked for his side. No one cared that the other guy walked away untouched. The kitchen shut down a month later. Bad press, health violations, maybe just bad luck. But no one told that part of the story. They just said Chris had lost it. And that was the version people believed. He replayed it often. What he could have done differently, what words he might have said instead. But tonight was different. Tonight, he hadn't proved anything to anyone. He hadn't put on a performance, hadn't chased praise or tried to earn forgiveness through some grand display. He had just shown up. Quietly, willingly, fully present. And that mattered more than he realized, because showing up, especially when it would have been easier to hide, was a kind of courage all its own. After all the noise of the past, the shouts, the sirens, the slammed doors, tonight was different. He stepped into the heat, into the need, into the risk. Not to be seen, but to be useful. To serve, to rebuild something quietly, from the inside out. And sometimes that's where redemption really begins, not with a clean slate, but with a steady presence, not with proving you're worthy, but by simply being willing to try again. And sometimes that's where redemption starts. He closed his eyes and let the quiet settle, not the silence of being ignored, but the kind that comes after work well done. End of part 2. Sometimes grace doesn't look like applause. Sometimes it looks like hot skillets, second eggs, and a door left open when someone walks out. Stay with us for part 3, where the name tag finally gets filled in and forgiveness arrives when no one's looking. Part 3. Forgiven. There was no big announcement, no promotion speech, no certificate taped to the wall. Just one day, the owner glanced over the counter, gave a short nod, and told him to keep cooking. That was it. But somehow, it meant everything. In a life where so much had been taken with noise, handcuffs, verdicts, slammed doors, this quiet moment restored something with stillness. No applause, no speeches, just trust, handed back without ceremony. For a man who'd spent years trying to prove he deserved to be in the room, that unspoken trust was louder than praise. It was the kind of moment that doesn't make headlines, but makes healing possible. He didn't get a raise, no one handed him a new title, but she didn't stop him, didn't hover, didn't correct. She just let him work. And slowly, almost shyly, he started adding his own touch. A twist on the biscuits, a new seasoning in the grits, a hint of something soulful in the specials. It was unspoken, but obvious. The food was better. Not just technically, but soulfully. Plates came back clean. The waitstaff stopped sneaking bites off orders. Regulars started asking what was new, what had changed. There was a warmth in the dishes that hadn't been there before, a kind of care you could taste. The biscuits had more lift, the grits had depth. The flavors didn't just fill a plate, they lingered in memory. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't complicated, it was honest, nourishing, the kind of food that made you feel like someone saw you, even if they didn't know your name. And without saying anything, the staff began looking to him, asking for help, copying his rhythm, following his lead. He hadn't announced himself, he hadn't pushed. But somehow, he had stepped into something solid. It showed. In the food, in the people, he was doing great. He started adding his own touch, a twist on the biscuits, a new seasoning in the grits. A few weeks in, the chalkboard by the register quietly changed. No fanfare, no announcement, just 4 new words written in clean, white chalk. Chef's Special by Chris. By week 2, the regulars noticed. The cornbread was fluffier. The sausage had just the right kick. One morning, someone left a note scribbled on a napkin. "Tell the cook, thank you. Reminded me of my grandma's cooking." Chris didn't tell anyone, but he kept the napkin in his wallet. Tucked behind his driver's license, next to a worn photo of his son, one he hadn't seen in almost a year. The old woman who hired him still didn't say much, but she saw everything. After the breakfast rush one morning, she slid into the booth across from him by the window, a Sharpie in her hand. "You still got that name tag?" she asked. He reached into his pocket. It was still there. Blank. Worn now, edges curled, the sticker starting to peel. She placed the marker on the table and slid it toward him. "Write it," she said. He blinked. "You sure? You've earned it. And people ought to know the name behind the cornbread." He looked down at the marker, then at her. Chris. It was a simple name, but it hadn't felt like it belonged to him in a long time. When you go inside, people stop using your name. You become numbers, labels, a reputation. But this time he wrote it. Not because someone forced him to, not because it was expected, because he wanted to, because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he deserved to. Not just to wear the name, but to own it. Writing Chris wasn't just about marking a name tag. It was a declaration, a quiet reclaiming of a life he thought was gone, of dignity, of place, of worth. The name didn't change, but he had. And somehow, the ink made it feel real. Chris. No erasing, no initials, like it had roots. Words spread slowly, then all at once. People came not just for the food, but for his food. The Chris Special made it onto the chalkboard outside. He didn't put it there, didn't even know it had happened, until one morning someone came in and ordered it like it had always been there. It caught him off guard. He blinked, then looked out the window and saw it. His name, written in bold strokes on the old sidewalk sign, right under the breakfast hours. It wasn't just a title, it was a statement. That dish had become part of the diner's identity now. And so had he. For the first time, Chris wasn't just in the kitchen, he was shaping the soul of the place. That little chalkboard had once advertised half-price pie and basic eggs. Now it told a story. His story. It meant he wasn't just forgiven. He was trusted, celebrated. The diner had taken his name and held it up for the world to see. Not to erase his past, but to honor the grace of what he'd become. He still stayed late, still cleaned the sinks, but something began to shift. He hummed while he prepped. He cracked jokes with the line cook. He started trusting the rhythm of the kitchen again, and trusting himself. Before long, he was mentoring the younger guys in the back, showing them knife skills, teaching them how to fix a broken hollandaise without panicking. He talked them through mistakes without yelling, gave praise freely, things he wished he had known to do last time, and he knew the damage a few harsh words could do. So instead of breaking people down, he built them up. He gave second chances. He let them breathe. Because grace had come to him that way, and now he passed it on, one plate, one shift, one kid at a time. One of the busboys, a quiet teen named Ramon, started sticking around after hours. Said he wanted to learn how to cook. Chris started leaving the side door propped open. "Bring your own apron," he told him one night, "and no shortcuts." Ramon nodded. "Yes, chef." Chris smiled. No one had called him that in years, and somehow it didn't feel like ego. It felt like responsibility, but it felt good too. Not the kind that weighed him down like before. This was different, lighter, somehow. Rooted in trust, not fear. He wanted to be someone others looked to. He wanted to show up, not just for the food, but for the people behind it. Responsibility like that. It didn't drain him. It filled him. Then came the offer. Bigger restaurant. Flashy. Downtown. White tablecloths. Signature cocktails. Prestige. The kind of place people posted about. Where menus were leather-bound and reviews could make or break a career. Where his old self, the one chasing titles, recognition, the next big thing, might have felt right at home. They offered more money, more exposure, a name on the website, a shot at building his reputation. But this time, it didn't feel like rescue. It felt like a test, because now he had something to lose. Not status, but meaning. Not a title, but a team. Not a spotlight, but a soul-filled kitchen where second chances simmered daily. The manager had come in one morning, tried the hash, left a business card. Chris tucked it in his wallet, opposite the napkin. He sat on it for a week. Didn't tell anyone. Then one night, after close, he found the old woman stacking chairs. "I got a call," he said. "They want me, downtown." She didn't stop stacking. "You want it?" He paused. He could picture the kitchen, the shine, the pressure, the old ambition stirring in him again. "I don't know," he said. "I thought I did. But this place..." She nodded. "This place helped you find yourself again." "I can see that." Same hands. But steadier now, hands that once threw in the towel too early, now staying late to train someone slower than he used to be. Hands that used to clench in frustration, now holding back, offering help instead of heat. Hands that had served time, now served people. The size of his hands hadn't changed. But his heart had. He wasn't just chopping onions anymore, he was building something. With every motion, stirring, plating, teaching, his hands weren't just preparing meals, they were passing on grace. And in those small, unseen movements, something holy was happening. "I think I want to stay," he said. She nodded again. "Good, because I was going to ask if you'd take over the kitchen." He said yes. Not just to cooking, but to leading, to mentoring, to rebuilding something that had once barely hung on. He didn't change the menu much, just enough to breathe new life into it. At the bottom of every receipt, he added a new line. "Thank you for letting us serve you." He posted the flyer from the men's shelter on the corkboard by the fridge. 3 months later, 2 guys from the shelter were on payroll. One of them said he hadn't held a job in 6 years. "Chris took a chance on me," the man said. Chris just smiled. He knew what it felt like to need that first crack in the wall. Then came the day the old woman didn't show. First time in decades. The whispers started. "A stroke," they said. 2 words that changed everything. She'd stood behind that counter for over 40 years, never once called in sick, never once left early. She was the place. The steam, the sass, the steady hand when everything got too loud. And now she was in a hospital bed. It didn't seem possible. The woman who could crack 10 eggs one-handed, settle a dispute with just a raised eyebrow, and slice through a delivery mix-up like it was soft butter, was suddenly silent, fragile. The diner felt it immediately. Even with the griddle hot and the coffee flowing, something was missing. Like the soul of the place had taken a breath and was holding it. Chris heard it from one of the waitresses who came in crying. No details, just the word. Stroke. He didn't ask questions. He took off his apron, wrapped up the soup she'd always liked, and walked straight to the rehab center. That's where grace shows up. Not when it's convenient, but when it's needed. And this time, it was his turn to give some back. Chris visited her in rehab, brought her lemon soup in a mason jar, just like he had once brought to her mother, back when hospice halls were heavy and kindness came in quiet gestures. Now the roles had reversed. Now he was the one knocking gently, showing up with warmth tucked into a jar. And this time, the soup wasn't just nourishment. It was a full circle moment. He set it gently on the tray beside her, steam curled up like a quiet offering. "You remembered the lemon soup," she whispered. Her voice was thin, rasped from days of silence and strain. But her eyes found the jar, and something behind them softened. Chris nodded, crouching beside the bed so she wouldn't have to lift her head. "Always," he said. He unscrewed the lid, stirred it once, just the way she liked, then held it near so she could smell it. "Little extra time this time," he added. "Thought you'd approve." Her lips curved just barely, a ghost of her old smirk. The kind that used to follow a dry joke or a subtle dare in the kitchen. She squeezed his hand. Her grip was weak, but her presence was still fierce, still fire. And in that moment, nothing had changed. She was still the heartbeat of the place, and he was still her cook. But the roles had shifted. Now he was the one holding things steady. Now he was the one who remembered, not just the lemon soup. She squeezed his hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes still fire. He didn't cry until he got back to the alley. Then he did. He sat on a milk crate, back against the brick, and let it come, quiet, honest, earned. Somewhere along the way, the kitchen had become his again, not because he took it, but because he served it, and the people in it. The diner never became a 5-star bistro. It never made the evening news. But it became something else. A place of quiet redemption. A place where burned-out people could start over. Where a man who once lost everything got to wear his name again. Closing line. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive with applause, but sometimes it comes through grease and gratitude, passed down in a bowl of lemon broth and a name written in ink. Thanks for walking this journey with us. And remember, redemption often begins behind the scenes. Let's keep sharing stories like these. One second chance at a time. The end.